Good evening, guys. All are getting my screen and voice. Please confirm.
Yes, sir.
Right. So today we are going to start. Today, just I will give the course content, guys. What we are going to discuss in Docker and Kubernetes. Right. First, I will give the course content. Then we will start one by one, guys. Docker and Kubernetes. So what we are going to discuss it here. First, guys, we are going to talk about introduction of the Docker. First we will talk about introduction. So in introduction, what we are going to discuss? In introduction, we will discuss what is application. What is application? Next, what is application stack? If you want to develop a full stack application, what technical stack is required? What is application stack? What is application stack? Next, guys, right, what is virtualization? What is virtualization? Next, what is containerization? What is containerization? Next, so after discussing all these things, guys, Docker is a containerization platform. Right, before containerization, what people used to work, right? So people used to work with virtualization. So that's why before going to start the containerization, we need to understand what is virtualization and what drawbacks we have with this virtualization, and why we move to containerization we need to understand. So next I will talk about what is Docker. What is Docker, guys? Okay, so then we will understand features of the Docker, guys. Features of Docker we will understand. Guys, have a look into this. Features of the Docker. See, guys, this is what we are going to discuss in the introduction part. So first, right, we are going to create the Docker images for our application and libraries, dependencies. For everything we are going to create the Docker images. First, you should understand what is application, and for developing that application, what technical stack we are going to use, and what is virtualization, what is containerization, then what is Docker, and features of Docker we are going to understand. So next guys, we are going to see how to set up the Docker, guys. Docker installation. Docker installation we are going to understand. Next, Docker architecture, guys. Docker architecture we are going to discuss. Docker architecture. So in Docker architecture, we have different components, guys. Docker client is available. Docker client is available. Next, here we have Docker engine is available. Docker engine is available. Next, we have Docker file is available. Docker file. Next, we have Docker images, guys. Docker images. Next, Docker hub. Docker hub. Next, we have Docker containers. Docker containers, guys. See, guys, so all these are the components of the Docker architecture. Right, before going to start our implementation, we should understand these components, guys. What is Docker client? What is Docker engine? What is Docker file? What is Docker images? What is Docker hub? What is Docker containers? We should understand all these components, guys. Then only we can continue our work with the Docker. Right, so next here we are going to understand how to create the account in the Docker hub. Here Docker hub is a public registry. Right, if you want to put your images in the Docker hub, then you should have the account in the Docker hub. So here we are going to understand account creation. right, in Docker Hub. Account creation in Docker Hub, guys. Okay. Next, guys. So we are going to understand Docker commands. This is very, very important, guys. Docker commands we are going to understand. Right. So in Docker, we have so many commands are there, guys. Some of the commands which are related to images we have. Some commands are related to containers we have. Some commands related to networking we have. Some commands related to volumes we have, guys. We have so many commands are available in the Docker. We should understand all those commands, guys. We should practice those commands. Right. In interviews, they are asking, guys. They are asking to write those commands, guys. They will ask. Right, so one scenario, right, for that what commands we need to use, what Docker commands we need to use, or else they will tell, right, so right, so what this right command will do, what so and so command will do. They are asking the questions in the interview. So you should have, right, complete knowledge on all the Docker commands, container related commands, image related commands, and right, so networking related commands, volumes related commands. We have, right, almost 42, right, 40 commands are there, guys. If you by heart those 40 commands, right, so nothing, guys, right, you can play with the Docker. Okay, Docker commands here. Just I'm going to give few commands, guys. I can't able to give everything in this content. Just a few commands I'm going to type here, like Docker version. I want to know the version of the Docker. Next here, Docker info command. It will provide the information of the Docker. Next here, Docker help command is available. Help command. Next, Docker images command. Docker images command. Next we have Docker pull command. Docker pull command is available. Next we have Docker login command. Docker login command is available. Next, Docker push command is available. Next, Docker rm command is available. Docker rm command, right, so etc, guys. So like this we have several commands are available, guys. Like this we have multiple commands are available, right? In interview they are asking the commands, guys. Okay, fine. See, guys, let me give me 1 minute, guys. Right, for my personal usage I have written all the commands in one place, guys. Right, tomorrow, right, you guys also can prepare like that, guys. Like that one sheet you guys can prepare, guys. Right, for my personal use, right, I have prepared all the commands like this. Let me show once what commands we have. 1 minute. Select. See, guys, important Docker commands. If you have the commands like this, right, in one place, before going to the interview, you guys can have a look into all these commands. Just 5 minutes you can spend, right? If you spend 5 minutes, you can recollect all the commands, guys. See, here we have some of the commands related to images. To download the Docker image, what command we need to use? To upload the Docker image in the registry, what command we need to use? To search for a particular list of images downloaded into your Docker host, what commands we need to use? To delete the Docker image, what commands we need to use? See, guys, like this. See, guys, how many commands here we have, right, working on Docker container. So these are the Docker container related commands. And next we have, right, see, guys, run command. Run command is very, very important. On that run command, we can apply multiple options, guys. These are the options which we are going to apply with the run command. -name, -it, -d, next -e, -v, right, -volume. See, guys, these are the options which we are going to apply for the run command. Guys, sometimes they are asking, right, if you tell run command with this option, right, they are asking what is -d, what is -e, what is -v. So these things also they are asking. So you should have a look into these things also, guys. See how many options we have. Name, IT, interact to terminal, guys. IT stands for D, E, V, right, volumes from -p, capital P, small p. See, guys, small p we will use for the port mapping. Capital P, guys, if you want ignore the port mapping, then you can use capital T. Automatically it will do the port mapping, guys. RM command, remove command. See, guys, remove option like this. See, right, CPU, memory, right, domain name, IP, link. These are the options which we will apply on the run command, guys. Okay, next we have some of the commands, guys, related to networking, guys. Docker networking related commands are there, and we have some of the commands related to Docker volumes, guys. See, around 40 commands are there, guys. If you go through all these 40 commands, if you by heart all these 40 commands, nothing is there, you can play with the Docker, guys. Everything, Right? In Docker, everything we are going to do by using these 40 commands only. Right? Apart these 40 commands, nothing new you will get, guys. Everything you can do with these 40 commands only. Fine. Right, guys? See, first what we are going to understand, right? Introduction part, then Docker installation we are going to see, Docker architecture and Docker commands, guys. Next, after this Docker commands, we are going to understand, right, how to write the Docker files. I want to write the custom Docker file based on our requirement. Based on our project requirement, we need to write the Docker files, guys. How to write the Docker files? Writing Docker files. Writing Docker files, guys. Okay, here what we are going to do, creating Docker file. How to create the Docker file? Creating Docker file. How to create the Docker file? And see, guys, if you want to create the Docker file, you should know the some of the domain specific keywords are there. Docker domain specific keywords are there. You should know those keywords, then only you can write the Docker file. If you don't know the keywords, then you can't able to write the Docker file. Compulsory questions will come on the keywords, guys. They will ask, compulsory questions will come in the interview on the keywords. So what keywords we are going to use? See, guys, here, if you want to write the Docker file, you should know some keywords, guys. Keywords used in Docker file. Keywords used in Docker file. What keywords are there? Observe carefully. Right, from keyword is available. From keyword, next we have, right, maintainer keyword. Maintainer keyword is available, and we have copy keyword is available. Right, we have, right, add keyword is available. Right, we have run keyword is available. Next we have, right, cmd keyword is available. Next we have entry point keyword is available, and we have work directory, work dir keyword is available. Next we have volume keyword is available, etc. So like this, we have several keywords, guys. In interview, they are asking what is copy keyword and add keyword. What is the difference between these two? And what is the difference between run and cmd? What is the difference between cmd and entry point? When cmd keyword will be executed? See, guys, when cmd will execute and when entry point will execute, when run will execute, when cmd will execute. So these kind of questions they will ask in the interview. Here we have the list of keywords, guys. Some of the keywords will be executed at the time of image creation. Some of the keywords will be executed at the time of container creation. Guys, here two things we are doing. We are creating the image by using Docker file, and we are creating the container also. Right, in the Docker, whatever the keywords you are given, right, so these keywords, guys, some keywords will be executed at the time of image creation. Some keywords will be executed at the time of container creation. You should know all those things, guys. In interview, they will ask when run keyword will execute, when cmd keyword will execute. You should tell, right, which one will execute at image creation, which one will execute at container creation, that you should tell. Okay. So next, guys, after this, after creating the Docker file, right, we should know how to create the Docker images, guys. First, you are creating the Docker file. By using the Docker file, we will create the Docker images. Docker images we will create. Docker images, guys. Okay. Here what we are doing? First, we are creating the Docker file. Then, right, we are creating the Docker images. Docker images we will create it here, guys. Okay. Fine, guys. Here, if you want to create the Docker images, what you should understand here? Observe carefully, guys. Here you should understand, right, understanding base image. Right, in the Docker file, we will take the base image. On top of the base image only, we are going to create our own image, guys. First, you should know what is that base image. Understanding base image. Understanding base image, guys. Base image. Next, guys, here we should understand image structure, guys. Right, image structure. Image structure you should understand. Next guys, internals of the Docker image. Internals of the Docker image. Right, internals of the Docker image. Right, next, Docker image build process. Docker image build process. Next, tagging the images. Tagging the images. If you want to upload the images in the Docker Hub, you should tag that image with our user ID, guys. Right, whenever you have created the account in the Docker Hub, right, you will have one user ID, right? So for that user ID, you need to tag the image, guys. How to tag the images? Before going to upload the images in the Docker Hub, first you need to tag it. Then only you can upload. Here we are going to understand how to tag the images. Next, guys, image generation. So not like this here. Next, we will talk about run, guys. How to create the container. If you want to create the container by using images, then we need to execute the run command, and here inspect command. If you want to go inside the container, after creating the container, I want to go inside the container. For that, we are going to use inspect command. Next, if you want to remove the containers, remove commands, and prawn commands. If you want to delete all unused containers and unused images, then we will go for the prawn command, guys. Right, we will understand all these commands, how to work with all these commands also. We are understanding it here, guys. See guys, in the Docker images, first we need to understand about the base image. Next, image structure we need to understand. Internals of the Docker image. Docker image build process. Tagging the images. And write these commands, how to create the container by using image, inspecting that and remove prawn, all these things we are going to understand. Okay, next guys, next we are going to understand Docker containers. Docker containers, guys. Okay, see guys, in the Docker containers, running Docker container from the images. Running Docker containers, right, from the images, guys. Right, from where we are going to create the container, from the Docker image we will create the containers, guys. Next, listing all running containers. Listing all running containers. Right, here just what command you will use to list out all running containers. Okay, next, container life cycle. Container life cycle. Container life cycle. Next guys, how to start the container, how to start it or stop or restart the containers. Restart the containers. Next guys, remove the containers. Remove the containers. Next, container dependencies with multiple containers, guys. Right, container dependencies with multiple containers, guys. This is frequently we will use, guys. Container dependencies with multiple containers. Right, so running containers in shell, guys. How to run the containers in shell, etc. Right, all these things we are going to discuss in the Docker containers, guys. Okay, fine. So next important one is Docker volumes, guys. Next important one is Docker volumes. Right, in Docker volumes, what we are going to discuss, guys? What we are going to discuss in Docker volumes, what advantages we have with this volumes. Advantages of the volumes. Advantages of the volumes we will discuss. And bind mounts. Bind mounts. Next, volume over bind mounts. Right, volume over bind mounts. Volume over bind mounts. Next here, creating the volumes. Creating the volumes we will discuss. Next, list all available volumes. List all available volumes. Next, run container on volume. Run container on volume. Next, remove the volumes. How to remove the volumes? Right? Volume is nothing but what? A storage, guys. Here we are going to talk everything about the storages, guys. Here volume is nothing but storage. Whenever our application is running inside the container, it will generate some data, guys. Right? Container will generate some data. Right? If you remove that container, if you delete that container, what will happen? Whatever the data that container is generating, you will lose that data also. Instead of that, what we are going to do, right? We are going to mount the volume to the container, and whatever the data container is generating, that data we are going to store inside the volume. After storing the data inside the volume, right, if you remove the container also, no problem, our data is safe inside the volume, guys. So that is what we are going to understand in the Docker volumes, guys. Okay, next, guys, right, we have Docker Compose. This is very important in the Docker Compose, guys. Docker Compose. Here what we are going to understand. First, we need to see the Docker Compose installation. Next, Docker Compose files. Next, check the validity of the Docker Compose file. Check the validity of Docker Compose file.
We are going to understand this conditions, guys. What is this conditions? What is condition?
A Docker Compose file. Okay. Next here, what we check the validity of the Docker Compose file. Run the Docker Compose. Guys, if you want to work with multi-container architecture, then you should know this Docker Compose, guys. If you want to work with multi-container architecture, see, I have Spring Boot application. My Spring Boot sorry, guys. My Spring Boot application is communicating with the Tomcat server, and it is communicating with the MySQL database. Here you should have one Java application. You need to create one container for the Java application, and you need to create one container for the Tomcat server, and you need to create one container for the MySQL database. All three containers are required, guys. See here, right? So the Spring Boot application can connect with the MySQL database, and it should connect with the Tomcat server also. See here, how many containers we are using? Multiple containers we are using. Suppose if you don't have this Docker Compose, you need to start the Java application container separately, and you should start the MySQL container separately, and you should start the Tomcat container separately, and you need to establish the link between these two containers. Right? Instead of doing separately, if you write the Docker Compose file in single Docker Compose file only, you can define all the containers which you need to start. In the single Docker Compose file only, you can define multiple services, multiple containers which you need to start, and in that only we can able to configure the linking also. We can configure in the Docker Compose file. Docker Compose is a YML file, guys. It is a manifest file, guys. Docker YML file. Inside the YML file, we will configure everything, guys. Which containers you want to start? Java container, right, and Tomcat container, MySQL container. These containers I want to start. Then all these things we need to define under service section in the Docker Compose file, and we need to establish the links, guys. After creating the Java container, I need to tell, right, so it should link with the MySQL containers. How to establish the link between those two containers? All those things we will configure inside the Docker Compose file. If you want to start multiple containers at a time, then we should go for this Docker Compose. If you don't have this Docker Compose, separately you need to start each and every container, guys. Okay, fine. Right, run the Docker Compose, and stop the Docker. Right, stop the. Okay, here only we'll discuss all running, how to stop the containers and everything. Right, we will cover it here only, guys. Fine. So next, guys. Right, next after this, something I missed here. Okay, fine. One thing I missed it here, that is Docker networking, guys. Docker networking we are going to discuss. What is Docker networking? Right, how many types of networkings are available? Everything we are going to discuss. Here we have the bridge network. right, bridge network is available, and here we have host network is available, and we have none network is available, right, and we have overlay network, right, we can't able to discuss it here, but just I will give idea, guys. Why? Because right, overlay network we will use in orchestration platforms. Okay, we can't able to use that in the right containers, guys. Right, we should have the orchestration platform to discuss that overlay network. Here just I will give right overlay network and Macmillan network, guys. Okay, these are the different types of networks are available, right? We will understand all these networks, guys. The default network, whether you specified or not, the default network is the bridge network, right? Here we can create our own custom bridge network also, and we can attach our own custom network to the containers also. How to create the custom network, how to use the bridge network, how to attach custom network to the containers, everything we are going to understand it here. Okay, fine. So after this Docker networking, guys, one session, I'm not going to spend much time on the Docker Swarm, guys. Only one session I will take on the Docker Swarm. Why? Because this is not important and no one will ask the questions in the Docker Swarm. Here Docker Swarm is one of the orchestration tool like Kubernetes, guys, but in real time we won't use this Docker Swarm. In the Docker Swarm we have some limitations, that's why we won't go with the Docker Swarm, guys. Here we can't able to perform auto scaling automatically, guys. Scaling we can't able to perform automatically in the Docker Swarm. Manually you need to do, guys. But in the production level, how you will do manually? How you will do manually in the production level? We need to run some commands to perform the scaling, guys. But in the production you can't able to run the, we don't know when traffic will be increased, when huge traffic will come, we don't know that. Whenever traffic, right, huge traffic come, at that time you need to increase the number of servers, right? How you can know that when traffic will increase? So at that time, how you will go to the production server and how you will run the commands? We can't. So that's why, right, it is not recommended one, guys. That's why I will discuss only one day, guys. Whatever we will get in the Docker Swarm, everything will come in Kubernetes also. So here, instead of this Docker Swarm, in the companies, we will use the Kubernetes, guys, not Docker Swarm. Right? In the Docker Swarm, we have some limitations, load balancing, auto scaling, right? These problems are there with the Docker Swarm. That's why in the real time, we will use Kubernetes only. But I will discuss one day, right? 1 hour, 1.5 hour, we will spend 1.5 hour, we will spend, and we will try to discuss this Docker Swarm, guys. But right, much time we're not required to spend much time on this Docker Swarm. Fine, guys. Right, so these are the things which we are going to discuss in the Docker, guys. First, introduction part, Docker installation, Docker architecture, Docker commands, right, working with the Docker files, Docker images, Docker containers, Docker volumes, Docker compose, Docker networking, and Docker Swarm. Guys, these are the high level things what we are going to discuss in the Docker. Okay, clear, guys? Is it clear?
Yes,
it's clear.
Next, we are going to start Kubernetes, guys. Kubernetes, we are going to start. This is most important one. Observe carefully what we are going to understand in Kubernetes. Okay, right, guys. Kubernetes, the short form of the Kubernetes is K8s. K8s, guys. K8s means what? Right, between K and S, we have 8 characters are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Between K and S, we have 8 characters. That's why we will call it as K8s. Kubernetes short form is K8s, guys. Okay. Right, what we are going to discuss in the Kubernetes. Guys, here whatever I am going to note, whatever I am going to listing, right, those things only I will cover, guys. Right, if I want to discuss Kubernetes, right, so we can discuss 2 months also Kubernetes, asking, right, so discuss security at production level, etc., guys. Once you join in the company, right, so you should know how to deploy all these things in the dev environment, sit environment, QA environment. So security, how to provide the security at production level and all those things, you can understand easily, guys, once you join in the company. Right? So no one will put you directly in the production setup, guys. Right? They won't put you in the production environment. first 6 months, even if you have the 10 years experience or 15 years experience also in the company, first 6 months they will keep you in the dev deployments and sit deployments, these non-prod deployments only, guys. They will keep you in the non-prod deployments only. They won't put you in the prod deployments until getting complete knowledge on the process which they are following in the company. They won't involve you in the prod deployments. If you have more experience also, first you should understand what process they are following for the deployments. They will involve, guys, right? At the time of deployments, they will ask you to join that calls, but they won't assign the task to you for deployments, guys. First 6 months, that is sure. So there, once you join, right, so every deployment, right, you will join and you can understand what they are doing, what process they are following, everything, guys. Okay, here whatever I'm noting down, we can discuss those things. To discuss those things only, at least we need to spend 15 to 20 days only on the Kubernetes, guys. Okay, right. So I have seen, guys, some of the batches, right, so they are asking, right, so how to without script, how you will deploy the applications in the Kubernetes cluster by using GitOps tools, and in the production level, how to provide the security for pods, how to provide the security for right clusters at production level. All those things they are asking, guys, right? So it will take lot of time, right? Lot of time if you want to discuss all those, that much complete depth, guys. Okay, fine. So in interview, right, so they won't go till that, guys, but in real time we require all those things, guys. We require real time all those things, but once you join in the company, slowly you will get understand all those things. Fine. So what we are going to discuss in the Kubernetes, guys? What we are going to discuss in the Kubernetes? First, introduction of Kubernetes. First, we are going to start with introduction of Kubernetes. Right, here what we are going to discuss in the introduction part, right, what is containerization? What is containerization? Next, what is orchestration? Kubernetes is a orchestration platform. What is orchestration? What is orchestration? Next, orchestration tools. Orchestration tools we will understand. Next, Docker Swarm versus, right, Kubernetes. Both are orchestration tools only. Docker Swarm versus orchestration. Next, guys. Next, Kubernetes introduction, guys. Kubernetes introduction. Next, features of the Kubernetes. What features are there with Kubernetes? Features of Kubernetes. Next, Kubernetes terminology. Kubernetes terminology. Okay, right, all these things we will understand. Next important one, guys, this is very, very important, guys, Kubernetes architecture. If you guys are not strong in Kubernetes architecture, it is difficult to work with Kubernetes, guys. We have a lot of components in the Kubernetes architecture. We should understand each and every component in detail. In interviews, they will ask you to explain the Kubernetes architecture, and they will ask you what components are available in the Kubernetes architecture. Right? Kubernetes architecture. Kubernetes architecture, guys. Here, what components are available? So, Kubernetes. In the Kubernetes, we have, right, master nodes, and, right, and worker nodes are available. Worker nodes are available, guys. Okay, and here master node we can call it as control plane. Master node we can call it as control plane or master node, anything you can call. Control plane or master node, anything you can call. Right, in the control plane we have several components, guys. So these are the main components which we have in the control plane. The first one is API server, right? The second one is API server. Next, second one is scheduler. Next we have controller manager. Next we have controller manager. Next we have etcd. etcd is a database, guys. So these are the main components which we have in the control plane. In the interview, if they ask to explain the components of the Kubernetes architecture, first you should tell, right? Kubernetes contains a master node and worker nodes. In the master node, we have API server, scheduler, controller manager, and etcd. What API server will do, what scheduler will do, what controller manager will do, what etcd will do. All these things you should explain. So these are the components of only control plane. Only control plane, guys. Again, we have the worker node. Worker node also having some components, guys. What components are available in the worker node? See, guys, here worker node components. Worker node components. What components are available in the worker node? See, guys, here we have kube proxy. Kube proxy is available, and here we have kubelet is available. Kubelet is available, and we have Docker runtime is available. Next we have pods. Pods are available. Next we have containers. Containers are available. So these are the components of the worker nodes, right? So these are the control plane components. These are the worker node components. Control plane or master node, anything you can call. Anything you can call, guys. These are the master node components, and these are the worker node components. You should know what is the purpose of each and every component, guys. You should know what is the purpose of each and every component. Right? The combination of all these things, we will call it as a cluster. The combination of control plane and worker nodes, we will call it as a cluster. Kubernetes cluster, guys. If you want to communicate with the cluster, right? If you want to communicate with the cluster, we have two ways, guys. Two ways we can communicate. One is by using kubectl. Kubectl we can communicate with the cluster, or else using UI also we can communicate. But right, we will use kubectl only. Right, we won't use this UI, guys. In real time also, UI is not recommended way. Right, we will use kubectl only to communicate with the Kubernetes cluster. All the kubectl commands only we will execute, guys. Have a look into this architecture, guys. Have a look into this architecture. Kubernetes architecture contains control plane and worker nodes. In the control plane, we have the API server, scheduler, controller manager, and etcd. In the worker nodes, we have kube proxy, kubelet, Docker runtime, pods, and containers are available. To communicate with the cluster, we have two approaches. One is through kubectl we can communicate, or through UI, user interface, we can communicate. Here you should understand each and every component, guys. Each and every component, and what is the purpose of each and every component, you should understand. In interview, if they ask, explain the components of the Kubernetes architecture, means you should explain all these, right? How many components are there? 9 components are there at here. Total we have 9 components. You should talk about these 9 components in the interview. You should tell what is the purpose of each component also. What is API server? What is scheduler? What is controller manager? What is etcd? What is kube proxy? What is kubelet? What is Docker runtime? What is pods? What is containers? Everything you should explain in the interview. Okay, this is one of the most important interview question in the Kubernetes case. Fine. So after this, right, after this, next we are going to understand, right, Kubernetes setup, guys. Kubernetes setup, guys. Right, Kubernetes setup, guys, right, we can do in 2 ways, guys. Either by using provider manager clusters, guys, or self manager clusters. Right, here, if you want to create the cluster, self manager cluster, if you want to create, we have 2 approaches. Right, if you want to create a single node cluster, then we can go with the Minikube. If you want to create the multi-node cluster, then we need to go for Kubedium. We have Minikube and Kubedium. By using Minikube, we will create the single node cluster. By using Kubedium, we will create the multi-node cluster. Okay, or else provider manager clusters are available. EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, EKS. Amazon is providing EKS, guys. You can work with the EKS also. And Azure is providing AKS, you can work with AKS also. Same, GCP also providing Kubernetes cluster, you can work with that also, guys. So like that, providers are providing, right here, Azure, right, Amazon, Google, all these people are the providers. So these people are providing Kubernetes clusters, guys. You can work with those clusters also. Here we are going to understand how to work with EKS cluster also, guys. Okay. First, for a few days, we will work with our own custom, right, self-managed cluster. Later, we will work with EKS also, guys. Environment setup. Environment setup, guys. Okay. And here, how to set up, right, how to set up the cluster. How to set up the cluster. Next here, self-managed cluster. Self-managed cluster. Next we have a provider managed cluster. Provider managed cluster. Next we have Minikube, right? Minikube, guys, if you want to create the, right, here only I will write. If you want to create self-managed clusters, right, we can go with either Minikube, it or Kubedium, guys. Kubedium, right, we can use to create the self-managed clusters. Next, provider managed clusters, guys. Here we are going to understand EKS. EKS, guys, as the AWS EKS we are going to use, guys. AWS EKS is what, guys? It is the, right, provider managed cluster, guys. Okay, fine. So next, guys, next the important one is pod life cycle. Pod life cycle, guys. Pod life cycle. Okay, right, guys. In the Docker, what we are doing, we are creating the containers, guys. But in the Kubernetes, explicitly we won't create the containers. Explicitly we won't create the containers. What we will create, we will create the pods, guys. Inside the pods, containers will be created. Containers will be executed inside the pod. What is our job? Creating the pods is our job. Directly, explicitly, we won't create the containers in the Kubernetes. We have the Docker runtime, guys. If you observe the worker node, in the worker node, we have one component that is Docker runtime. It will create the container inside the pod. Docker runtime will create the container inside the pod. Our job is creating the pods. So you should understand the pod life cycle, guys. How to create the pods, right? What is the life cycle of the pod? Everything you should understand. Okay. Here we are going to understand pods, introduction of the pods, right? Introduction, pods, introduction. Pods, introduction. Next, types of pods creation. Types of pod creations. Pod creations, we have two types, guys, right? One is interactive pod creation. Interactive pod creation, right? Second one is declarative pod creation. Declarative pod creation. Okay, interactive pod creation means just by using one command we can create the pod, guys. Just I will write one single line command, with that we can create the pod. But it is not recommended approach, guys. We won't use interactive pod creations in the real time. We will go with the declarative pod creation only. Declarative pod creation means we need to write the manifest file for pod creation. We need to write the manifest file. By using that manifest file, we will create the pods, guys. Okay, we will follow this declarative approach only, not interactive approach, guys. Right, to creating the pod, we have two ways. One is the interactive pod creation. Second one is the declarative pod creation. Okay, next, here we are going to understand, right, pod manifest files. Pod manifest files. Pod manifest files. Then we should understand kubectl commands. We are going to work with kubectl, so you should understand kubectl commands, guys. Okay, next, playing with pods, right? How to create different ways of pods and all those things we are going to understand. Playing with pods. Playing with the pods, guys. Next, manifest file syntaxes. Right, manifest file syntaxes. Simple, guys. Here a manifest file contains four things, guys. See, 1 minute. Let me open. Right. See guys, if you want to write the manifest file, first we need to take version we need to take. Second, we need to take kind we need to take. Third, we need to take metadata we need to take. Next, specification. So these four things we need to take in the manifest file. Right, version, kind, for which purpose you are creating the right manifest file, for which purpose you are writing this manifest file. I am writing it for pod creation, or else I am writing this manifest file for service creation. So that kind you need to tell. Metadata, in the metadata section we need to tell what is the name of this pod and some labels we need to give. Right, what is the purpose of labels and all those things we will discuss guys. And specification, spec guys, here you need to tell, right, which image you want to use, right, what container you want to create, what name you want to give for the containers, what is port mapping, everything you need to specify in the specification section. Right, all these four things you need to take in the right manifest file, whether it is a service manifest file or pod manifest file. These four things are common, these four things only we need to take. Right guys, you should remember these things. If you want to write the pod manifest file or if you want to write the service manifest file, we need to define these four things only: version, kind, metadata and spec. Right, spec is nothing but specification. What is this in detail we will discuss guys. Okay, fine. Here this is the syntax of the manifest file. That is the syntax of the manifest file guys. Okay, fine. So next here, static pods. Right, we have some of the static pods guys. Right, we should understand what is the static pods. And the next, pod recreation. Right, pod recreation and pod deletions. How to delete the pods? Pod deletion. Right, pod deletion. Next, we should understand pod labels. Just now I told in the metadata section we will take the labels guys. So pod labels we will take. Next, pod templates. This is also very important. Inside the pod, at the time of pod creation only, we will take the templates also in the pod. Right, all these things we are going to understand in the pod lifecycle guys. This section is very important guys. Right, so pod lifecycle. Next guys, after pod lifecycle, we are going to understand Kubernetes namespace. Guys. What is this namespace? Guys? Simple guys. Right, if you guys are the developers, right, you guys know we have the packages. Inside the packages, what we will have guys? We will have the set of classes, interfaces, everything are available in the packages guys. Same here also. Namespace is nothing but a package. It contains pods and services, everything. Right, at the way here by default, whenever Kubernetes installed, right, you will get by default, right, 3 namespaces you will get: default namespace, kube system namespace. Like that, we have 3 to 4 default namespaces, guys. Right, but in real time, for our project, we need to create our own custom namespace and our project related pods, our project related services, everything we need to create in our namespace only. Okay, but if you are not giving the namespace at the time of pod creation, by default that pod will be created in the default namespace. Okay, we will understand what default namespaces are available, how to create the custom namespace, how to use that custom namespace for our pod creations, everything we will discuss it here guys. Kubernetes namespaces guys. Right, fine guys. After this namespaces, what we will discuss right here, just I will write a few points about this namespace also. Right, what is namespace? Next, default namespaces. What we have. Next here, custom namespace. How to create the custom namespaces. Next, how to work with namespaces guys. How to work with namespaces, everything we will understand it here. Okay, fine. After this, we are going to understand Kubernetes services guys. Kubernetes, this is also guys, here whatever I'm writing in the Kubernetes, everything is important only in the interviews. Kubernetes services, Kubernetes services, guys. Right, they will ask, what is the purpose of why we are going for services? What is the use of the services, guys? If you want to expose your pod outside of the cluster, we should have the services. By using these services only, we will expose the pod outside of the cluster. And I have an application. I deployed the application. I want to access that application from the browser. From the browser, if you want to access the application, you should expose that. How you can expose? By writing the services. By writing the services only, we can expose our application outside of the cluster. If you are not writing the services, then from browser you can't able to access the application. Here we have different types of services. Cluster IP is there, node port is there, load balancer is there. These are the different types of services we have. By using these services only, we will expose our application outside of the cluster. Okay. Fine. So here, what is Kubernetes services? What is Kubernetes services? Guys, this is compulsory question in the interview. Why we need Kubernetes services? Next, guys, how to create Kubernetes services. Kubernetes services. Next, guys, types of services. What types of services are available? And here we have cluster IP. Next we have here node port. Next we have here load balancer. So these are the different types of services are available. Here also, you need to write the manifest file for service also. How you are writing the manifest file for the pod? Same way for services also you need to write the manifest file. Service manifest file. Next, service related commands. What commands are there? Service commands, guys. Next, pod expose outside of the cluster. By using service, how you will expose the pod outside of the cluster? Pod expose outside of the cluster. Right, all these things we are going to discuss in the Kubernetes services case. Okay, next important one is Kubernetes. Guys, everything is important only. Kubernetes objects. This is also very, very important, guys. Right, here replication controller. Guys, frequently they are asking the questions in the Kubernetes object. Differences they will ask, guys. Right, first object is replication controller. Second one is replica set. In interview they will ask what is the difference between replication controller and replica set. This is one of the most important interview question, guys. Difference between replication controller and replica set. Okay, now here replication controller versus replica set. Okay, next, guys. Right here, guys, difference between replication and controller and replica set is almost same. There is no much difference. Only one difference is there between replication controller and replica set. That is selectors. What is selector? We will discuss. Okay. Only the difference between replication controller and replica set is selectors. Only the difference is selectors, guys. Okay, here multi-selectors. In the replica set, we will use the multi-selectors, guys. Multi-selectors we will use in the replica set, but in replication controller, we will use single selector only, but in the replica set, we will use multi-selectors, guys. Next, the most important question is daemon set. This question also free. I only faced multiple times this question, guys. Daemon set. So what is daemon set? Why we need to go for the daemon set? When daemon set is required in real time, right? In our previous project, when you used this daemon set, right? I only faced this question multiple times in the interviews. Okay, next, guys. Right here only I'm going to add this point also. When to use daemon set. When to use daemon set, guys. Okay, next, guys. Next we have stateful sets. What is the stateful sets? This is also one of the most important, that is deployments. Deployment, guys. This is also most important one, guys. Deployment, guys. Next here, right, we have rollouts and rollbacks. Rollouts and rollbacks. Okay. Next we have, right, deployment strategies. This is, if you put Kubernetes in resume, this is 200% question. Without this question, there is no Kubernetes interview. Compulsory question. Deployment strategies. Deployment strategies. In your project, which deployment strategy you are following? In your project, which deployment strategy you are following? We have multiple strategies are available. Recreate strategy. Right, recreate strategy. Next, rolling update strategy. Rolling update strategy. Next we have blue green deployment. Blue green deployment. Blue green.
Here, canary deployment, we can use it? No, right?
Huh?
Canary.
No, here we will use. Generally, guys, in the interview, if they ask, you can tell directly I am using blue green deployment, guys. You can say blue green deployment. Again, they are asking, guys. Recently, I faced the question, right? Why not you are using rolling update or recreate? Okay, they won't ask recreate, guys. Why not you are using rolling update? Right, rolling update also best only. We can go with rolling update also. Why not you are using rolling update? Why you are using blue green deployment? What are the different environments we will have in the blue green deployment? When we will use blue environment, when we will use green environment, they are asking a lot of questions in the deployment strategies, guys. So this is also very important, guys. You can say in the interview, if they ask, right, which deployment strategy you are using in your project, means you can say I am using blue green deployment strategy. You can say blue green deployment strategy you are following in your project, guys. Okay, fine. So next one is why we are going for Kubernetes, right, instead of Docker Swarm, means auto scaling. Kubernetes auto scaling. In the Docker Swarm, we don't have this auto scaling facility. In the Docker Swarm, we don't have this auto scaling facility, and so that's why we are going with the Kubernetes, guys. Okay, here what we have, what is auto scaling? What is auto scaling? And here we should understand what is horizontal scaling. What is horizontal scaling? And right, what is vertical scaling? Minute, guys.